Hello and welcome to this reaction to The Last of Us, a brand new HBO show that started based on the acclaimed game. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Posters everywhere. It's been in production for such a long time. It's been 10 years since the game came out. James, The Last of Us, what is going on?
Yeah, as you said, adapted from the game from 2013. We've brought it up a couple of times on this show.
Yeah.
I talked about how I'm a really big fan of the games. And for a long time, as you said, people have been trying to adapt this originally to a film and then to a TV show. And at first, the sentiment from a lot of people was, please don't do this. We don't need it. The game is good enough on itself. There's nothing really to gain from making this more cinematic because the game is so successful as a storytelling tool in its own right. And then all of a sudden, we hear HBO picking it up. Big green flag. The writer, director from the game, Neil Druckmann, is heavily involved, with the writing process and is directing a couple of episodes. Also great. Craig Mazin, who did the very good Chernobyl, is a part of this. I immediately see the crossover. Great. Pedro Pascal cast, Bella Ramsey. All of these things are there, and I'm like, I actually had this moment where I was like, no, it's too good to be true. I don't believe it. Like it's actually like it can't really be that good. I think for a long time in the storytelling realm in video games, I think a lot of people used to have a discussion about whether or not the story in a video game was good. It was always like, is the story good? And we go, yeah, it's great. I think when The Last of Us came out, it really felt like for the first time, you were no longer just discussing if the story was good. It was, how did that make you feel? What moment did you feel that? You'd speak to different people and people would have like conflicting different opinions about how that story made people feel. And I thought, oh, this is like taking everything to a different level. You know, you had part 2 come out in 2020, and that was also very great. And I think a lot of people, as I said, really didn't want this to happen. It was originally going to be a film, and people said, you can't tell this really long story that's going to be watered down into a 92-minute, 2-hour experience. Typically, the video game curse is kind of yet to have been broken in film, except maybe for Sonic, which I haven't seen, but I know people are saying they like it, but that's not really where I kind of want the video game storytelling space to be.
Yeah, and also like that's adapting a very different, earlier type of video game.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway.
So in comes The Last of Us. And The Last of Us is set in 20 years after the fall of humanity, essentially. We're in a post-apocalypse. We can call them zombies. They're not called zombies. They're called the infected. But the story is that there's this infection, which is actually a real infection called cordyceps, which happens in ants, which is a fungal infection that takes over the brain and causes whoever's infected to completely lose their minds and go crazy, and you can be infected by biting other people. We pick up with a character called Joel, who is, after a family tragedy at the start of the outbreak, we find him 20 years later as a broken man who literally does whatever he can to survive. He lives in this society that is run by Fedra, which is a military-controlled government dictatorship, and they have to live in these quarantine zones because outside of the quarantine zones is the wasteland of America, the post-apocalypse, the infected, and you sort of pick him up. He is a smuggler. He is someone who operates and works for the quarantine zones that he lives in, but he's also trying to reconnect with his brother who's somewhere out into the American wasteland. And in comes this character called Ellie, who's been basically put aside by a militia group called the Fireflies. And the Fireflies are sort of acting as a combatant to Fedra. And they have this dynamic where they're sort of like fighting, trying to reclaim land and reclaim order of the society, which is very unfair, very corrupt. And you know, my first thought when I watched this first episode is that, oh, they've done an 82, 83-minute episode. It almost felt like 2 episodes. And they did this intro, which in the game is about 15 minutes, and they stretched it out for about 35. And it almost felt like an episode unto itself. And, you know, I had a lot of opinions, but my main one was, what a fantastic episode and start to that series. You know, I was a fan of some of the things that they changed, and I'm just surprised by how much they were able to expand on what was already there. For a fan of that game, to make me so captivated and so interested in every little bit and just have it wash over me. I thought the changes they made sense. And I mean this in the best way, but I think I was surprised by how much they were making it appeal to a mainstream audience. I feel like there is so much there for everyone to really enjoy. What did you think?
I think that's an interesting point because you clearly very, very familiar with the source material.
Yes, yeah.
I have played the game once 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Liked it, remember it vividly, but like, yes, I've done it. But I haven't returned to it since, okay?
Yeah.
So it's in the past for me. I also watched it with my girlfriend who had no knowledge of the existing material, okay? So between the three of us, right, we have kind of a spread. So I was approaching it, okay, I know what this is about. I remember the certain beats of it. And I immediately felt just... What I got was that it was so clear.
HBO treatment, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was so clear that the creative team behind it had a complete command and understanding of the source material and how to make that work on TV. I was immediately hooked into the story. It's tense, and I think it's perfectly open to your average viewer. My girlfriend was just into it straight away. There's this bit that they include that wasn't in the games to my knowledge with John Hannah set in like 1968.
Yeah.
They explained that fungal infection, which
Really
wasn't in the
grounds
game,
it, isn't it?
and that just works perfectly. Just as an audience member, you get whiffs of obviously in now post COVID era how we understand pandemics. It just really sets up how this thing can work, and it's an episode of two halves. That first episode, the first bit. The creating the tension by you're aware that something at the peripheral of your vision is off. Sometimes literally at the peripheral of your vision, something bad is happening, but also there's sirens going by and you're following the daughter. And then then the cinematic execution of the outbreak, which a lot of that is almost like scene, like frame by frame.
There are some frames which are direct
lifts from the place the original game. Which is absolutely fine. And I love that outbreak scene. The house on fire, the planes, the people running out of the bars. It's brilliant. And it's really hair-raising, tense stuff. And with the second half, I think the way that they create the world is just so vivid. And I'm in there straight away. And I really didn't feel like I'm watching a video game adaptation. I really felt properly into it. I mean, obviously we love Pedro Pascal. I think that choosing the team behind Chernobyl is really smart because Chernobyl obviously was a series that understood a cataclysmic event, the build up to it, the immediate fallout, no pun intended, around it, and the long lasting effects. And I'm watching The Last of Us. I was like, oh yeah, it's the same thing. It's a cataclysmic world event that has long lasting effects that affect you emotionally. It also understands that the thing that elevated the original game was its emotional storytelling, and that's front and center. It's got created a clear path for the story to thrive, and it's immediately anchored you within this completely new.
It's also worth mentioning,
landscape.
I think it's really tricky to essentially come out with a zombie TV show in 2023 after, in 2013 when that game came out, the zombie genre was much more prolific and hot. And, it would be very easy for us to feel like this whole pandemic, especially after our own pandemic, like this outbreak. And, it's got its own twist on fungal zombies. I could easily feel like quite tired and I could switch off to it. But I really felt like if you had not told me that The Last of Us show existed and you showed it to me, I would immediately know that's The Last of Us. It felt really distinct and individual. And, it doesn't feel like the Walking Dead. And just like the fact that it was so rewarding to me, giving me so much to digest on, little comments in the game that were said as dialogue while you're walking, exploring, are like properly explored in scenes. And I'm so glad that they've like unpacked like how Ellie came into contact with Marlene and how those two, the way that those two intersect is so well realized in this game. And I'm like, coming out of the way this episode ends, which I thought was so good with the sound of the clickers and then walking off into the wasteland, essentially. I can't wait to see them pick up on the rest of the beats of this series, like Billstown, Left Behind, like the hospital, the whole David Winter sequence.
I don't remember any of that.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's not spoiling for you. It's just like I cannot wait to see what they're doing with it. Pedro Pascal immediately just falls into the character of Joel. He does so many different things in that episode, like from the opening where he's completely different person to who he is now and what he has to do to survive, and there's this great moment when they're agreeing to take Ellie as cargo, and there's this comment where like, I know what you guys are capable of. And Ellie's like, what are they capable of? And you sort of learn like the things they're going to have to do to survive. And there's loads of stuff I hope they unpack about what Joel did in the 20 years between the outbreak and where he is now. And there's, what I really like is in video games when you're trying to tell a story, because you're an avatar exploring an area, often people will use writing on walls as a way to like use environmental storytelling. So the whole Fireflies, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. I kind of like that way of telling a story was still there, and it sort of was still working, because environment is so important in The Last of Us, and you're exploring the old world, and people are asking you about what is a like coffee shop and a cafe, and you're sort of explaining to a young person you never knew in that world. And I like that the environment's still so strong, and even just seeing rooms of like Ellie chained up to a radiator, and just like what that story tells, I just think was fantastic. I had this big feeling of like, oh, they did it. What a relief. This feels really, really well done, and it's adding up to what I think could be a real perfect storm of a show.
Yeah, I think that's exactly well put. That's how that episode ends. I'm really looking forward to it. Look, we will touch in, won't we?
Yeah.
Week to week about how we're doing with them. We'll probably maybe talk about it when we get to the end of the season. But I think if you're looking for a kind of a razor sharp new prestigious TV show to watch, it's different. Watch this.
As a fan, it felt like I was watching an extended director's cut of my favorite game. It didn't feel like a completely separate thing.
Yeah.
Like Uncharted, I didn't think was awful, but it didn't feel like what I knew as Uncharted from a video game to movie adaptation. It's like, this is different. Yeah. I really feel like I've bought the expensive DVD,
the other,
and it just immediately falls into the next one. Another thing I really liked, that just like being able to tell the story in new ways, because the game is much more from Joel's perspective. You see and experience things from Joel. That changes a little bit, but I love that we got more of Ellie, and to see her as this like feral, potty-mouthed girl in this crazy world, and the way in which the whole thing with the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s at the end, which you can see for yourself and discover, and the way in which they go off into the end, and the sound design of that whole thing building, and you're just like, yes, like start the story, let's go. It's just really, I cannot wait to see more.
I think that one thing I just want to say when watching it is, if you're liking the show like you are, and you're really into it, I just want to flag Children of Men from 2006, okay? Right? Which is a film you haven't seen, right?
No.
But I've mentioned before. And some people might not have seen it. I want to mention it because there is a direct DNA link between that and this, right? It's predominantly narratively. The narrative of the plot of Children of Men is very similar to the plot of The Last of Us. But I make the comparison because storytelling has evolved so much that I made the comparison because Children of Men is this Alfonso Cuarón movie from 2006 with Clive Owen, and it's science fiction. It's based in a world where women have been unable to have children for many years, and it was set in like 2027 or something. Okay, and it's a dystopian world where it's economic pressure and refugee crisis. Funnily enough, quite prescient now. But that film was really striking in creating a dystopian world with this kind of that was bleak and richly detailed, but also gave you small hints at a much wider story whilst having an emotional heart and emotional story running through it. Now, The Last of Us has a very similar story plot to that, and I look at that and I notice that the way that storytelling has changed is that the amount of detail and information you get in the first episode of The Last of Us is almost on par with the whole film of Children of Men. Sure. And if you watch Children of Men now, it's still fantastic, but it's almost slightly dated because you think this would now be a TV show. You wouldn't have to cram such a massive world into one little film. But I just want to flag it to people that if you're really enjoying The Last of Us and you want to see that kind of handled how it was before, when storytelling was different by a previous generation, do check out Children of Men because it's wonderful.
Another one is Neil Druckmann said this is what he was very heavily inspired by was Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Yeah,
which is a great book, and also very good, very dark film with Viggo Mortensen. Yeah. It's sort of depicting a world that really is lost. There's no sort of like romantic veil on what it is and what's happening. There's so many really dark moments that are there to happen. And have you seen The Road?
Yeah, I've not seen it, I've read it.
Oh, the film's also great. Yeah. Really depressing. You know how we mentioned in last week's episode, like films that you really liked but don't necessarily want to watch again? Yeah. Like that's probably one of them. It's really bleak, really, really bleak. But yeah, just what a sigh of relief. Yes. Thank you, HBO, for just doing it properly and breaking the curse.
I rub my hands in excitement at the next. Well, has it broken the curse in the sense that I still would like to see a film
that really does well? Yeah,
but also like doing a TV show makes complete sense.
It's like they're getting better.
Yes,
with the films, it's like coming to something. yeah, we're not quite there with films, but I feel like the story like this that takes place over a year, that, you know, it's really about two characters connecting over a period of time. I love that, you know, this is the period of the time when Joel and Ellie really don't get on, and like, you know, she tries to stab him in the knee basically the first time they meet. Bring on. What do you think of Bella Ramsey? She's good, isn't she?
Yeah, she's good. Yeah. I'm sat. I'm ready to go for the rest of the season.
Yeah, they had the same. The actor who played Marlene, who was like the head of the Fireflies. She's the same actor who's in the game.
Oh, okay.
And they kept a lot of that same. But yeah, let us know your thoughts as the show goes on. We would love to read out people's impressions if you played the game. We will do our best not to spoil. As I'm sure you can tell, we're not going to spoil the entire Last of Us Part 1 because I think a lot of people will be discovering this story for the first time. But yeah, we will talk about each episode as and when we want to. Hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com if you want to send us your thoughts.
Thank you.